Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Je voulais donc tout d'abord remercier les organisatrices du colloque qui se déroule donc dans le cadre de la saison Africa 2020, comme l'a précisé Anaïs. Donc, je remercie les organisatrices et organisateurs d'Africa 2020, de WER, bien entendu, et de l'école du Louvre, où j'ai la chance d'enseigner depuis 2008 l'histoire des arts d'Afrique subsaharienne. Et je tiens ici justement à remercier la directrice de l'école, Claire Barbillon, qui, dès sa première année de mandature, nous a permis d'intégrer enfin l'art contemporain africain dans notre enseignement de spécialité. Alors, je vais profiter de ces quelques minutes d'introduction pour apporter vraiment sous la forme de généralité, quelques éléments sur l'histoire des techniques dans les arts visuels d'Afrique subsaharienne et plus spécifiquement la place qu'occupent les femmes. Donc, dans le domaine des arts visuels, qu'on peut appeler classiques ou traditionnels, un constat tout d'abord, nous connaissons très rarement le nom des artistes ou des artisans. En revanche, la question du genre et de la répartition des techniques est mieux informée. Alors, qui dit technique nous rapproche aussi des métiers, et nous savons combien en Afrique, comme hors d'Afrique d'ailleurs, le genre a son importance pour telle ou telle filière. Mais revenons à l'Afrique, au savoir-faire, aux techniques et bien sûr à la création. Des observateurs, ethnologues, historiens de l'art, se sont penchés sur les chaînes opératoires et les techniques et ont pu constater donc cette division du travail par genre. Mais attention, ces exclusivités ou ces interdits, tout dépend de quel côté nous nous plaçons, varient d'une région à l'autre. Mais quand même, un premier constat s'impose, l'artiste masculin prédomine dès qu'il s'agit de sculpture sur bois ou de métal. Une importante partie de ces œuvres sont conçues donc à des fins politiques, liées en premier lieu au prestige ou au religieux. Alors, je m'explique. La technique de la forge est une pratique exclusivement masculine en tout point du continent. La sculpture sur bois, quand elle n'est pas l'exclusivité du forgeron, est aussi une affaire d'hommes. Toutefois, alors on va passer à la première image, nous connaissons un rare exemple où une femme fut associée dans une coproduction pour l'exécution de coiffures qui sont en fait d'une certaine manière la signature aussi de ce style, en fibre végétale, dans la sculpture qui a été attribuée à son époux Sra. Nous sommes en Côte d'Ivoire, Libéria. Exceptionnel ou fréquent, difficile à dire, tant l'étude sur la personne de l'artiste dans son acception biographique est marginale pour les arts antérieurs aux indépendances. La femme, en tout cas, semble en retrait dans ses réalisations aux forts impacts esthétiques dans des contextes politiques et religieux. De fait, leur implication est moins valorisée. Alors, on va passer à l'autre image. Donc, je parlais de la forge, donc des métiers du feu, qui impliquent de nombreuses obligations et interdits, notamment dans les alliances matrimoniales. Puisqu'en Afrique subsaharienne, là où les compagnes du forgeron peuvent exercer un art du feu, celui de la poterie. Alors, qu'elle soit pour la vie quotidienne ou pour le sacré, puisque je pense notamment aux poteries vaudou qui sont fondamentales pour conserver l'eau lustrale, les femmes sont à l'œuvre. La transmission du savoir-faire se fait exclusivement au sein des familles, donc liées aux artisanats et aux arts du feu. Parfois, là on va passer à l'image suivante, comme pour les poteries figuratives thérapeutiques de la Benue au Nigeria, Les sculptures en poterie, en terre cuite, sont exécutées par les hommes ou les femmes. Mais ça reste, je dirais quand même assez exceptionnel, cette division, enfin, cette possibilité mixte de réalisation de sculptures en terre. Et comme l'a soulevé justement l'historien François-Xavier Fauvel, face à ce constat où la poterie est quand même une activité féminine, donc on va passer à l'image suivante, on peut se permettre d'émettre cette hypothèse que les plus anciennes sculptures africaines connues, donc celles en terre cuite et à usage funéraire, pourraient être une production féminine. Alors, dans le domaine de la peinture sur panneau, sur vélin ou sur les façades, excusez-moi, j'ai un problème d'ordinateur. Dans le domaine donc, de la peinture sur panneau, sur vélin, sur des façades sous forme de fresques. Alors, on va passer à l'autre image. Donc, la peinture aussi sur les parois, donc plus loin dans le temps. Il est difficile également de faire des généralités. Les créations seront l'apanage de l'homme ou de la femme, selon les régions. Et il est bien difficile de déceler de quel genre sont les artistes qui nous ont laissé, notamment les arts pariétaux. On peut en revanche déceler parfois un partenariat homme-femme dans l'œuvre ou l'objet qui se conçoit par assemblage au sein d'un ou plusieurs ateliers. Le textile est un bon exemple, même si des spécialités sont bien distinctes selon les genres. Alors, par exemple, le tissage sera masculin quand la teinture, alors on va passer à l'image suivante, et donc toute la subtilité de composition sera une technique maîtrisée uniquement par les femmes. C'est le cas des adirés Yoruba du Nigeria. La broderie sera exécutée là aussi selon les régions, soit par les hommes, ça va être le cas par exemple des boubous brodés du Sahel, soit ailleurs, on va passer à l'autre image, par les femmes, notamment en République démocratique du Congo, au royaume du Kouba. On peut donc, dans les grandes lignes, considérer que l'œuvre achevée peut être une création mixte, avec toutefois des spécialisations genrées dans les phases du travail selon les régions. Alors, je dois souligner l'importance qui a été accordée d'ailleurs ces dernières années en Occident à ces arts textiles africains, mais aussi à la poterie, donc aux activités où sont davantage impliquées les femmes, que ce soit dans le monde des musées ou dans le monde de la recherche. Alors, malgré une dominante masculine dans l'art de la forge et la sculpture sur bois, les femmes exercent donc leur talent sur de nombreux médiums. Aujourd'hui, dans un contexte plus mondialisé et une visibilité de l'art africain contemporain davantage affirmée depuis une vingtaine d'années, l'artiste n'est plus anonyme, il l'est moins. Les matériaux importés sur le continent au XXe siècle, mais aussi de nouvelles techniques, l'apparition des technologies au XXIe siècle, de nouvelles technologies au XXIe siècle, les nouveaux moyens de diffusion et l'arrivée en force des artistes africains dans le champ de la création internationale ont-ils contribué à une meilleure visibilité d'une partie d'entre eux, en l'occurrence les femmes? Donc, je finirai cette brève présentation par des questions qui ont été soulevées et qu'a rappelé tout à l'heure Anaïs, qui sont des questions soulevées par le conseil scientifique de ce colloque au sujet de notre panel sur les récits techniques. Existe-t-il toujours des liens entre le genre et les techniques employées? Comment la politique des matériaux et des techniques a-t-elle influencé la formation des discours sur les femmes dans le domaine des arts? Comment remettre en question et déconstruire ces derniers? Donc, notre session va nous entraîner dans d'autres récits techniques, en continuité ou en rupture, avec ce que je viens de présenter, autour de biographies, d'œuvres et d'actions de femmes artistes à l'échelle du continent dans le domaine des arts visuels comme des arts vivants. Alors, nous allons tout d'abord au nord du continent africain, au Maroc, dans une partie donc, du continent et un domaine que je n'ai pas abordé dans cette introduction. Alors, c'est Mahatazi à qui je vais laisser la parole après l'avoir présentée, Maa, qui vient tout juste d'obtenir son doctorat, puisqu'elle a soutenu sa thèse vendredi dernier avec succès à l'Université Concordia, donc j'en profite évidemment pour la féliciter. Son sujet de doctorat portait sur la désobéissance créative des femmes et la poursuite de la révolution de genre dans le Maroc post-printemps arabe 2011-2019. C'est d'ailleurs le titre que vous avez pu voir dans le programme. Et Maa nous propose de revenir aujourd'hui sur 2 chapitres qu'elle développe dans sa thèse sur la poésie slam et le rap. Alors, je vais présenter rapidement Maa, donc, qui, avant l'Université Concordia de Montréal, a étudié les sciences politiques et les relations internationales à l'Institut d'études politiques Sciences Po Paris, ainsi qu'en Turquie, au Maroc et aux Émirats arabes unis. Le cœur de ses recherches porte sur les installations féministes, le théâtre, le graffiti, les dessins politiques, la poésie slam et le rap, dans des contextes contemporains du Maroc, de l'Égypte et de la Tunisie également. Maatazi s'engage également activement dans la recherche-création et elle a publié un projet de réflexion et de photographie d'art dans le journal Feminist Media Studies pour sensibiliser à la thématique de la contre-révolution féministe au lendemain du printemps arabe. Elle a publié de nombreux articles, entre autres 2 pour le journal Women's Studies, et a rédigé l'entrée cyberféminisme dans le monde arabe dans l'International Encyclopedia of Gender and Communication. Sur le terrain, Maa a également fait du bénévolat auprès de plusieurs ONG féministes dans la région du Maghreb et du Moyen-Orient, par exemple auprès de l'association Solidarité féminine dans la ville de Casablanca, où elle a aidé les mères célibataires à apprendre une nouvelle profession et à se réinsérer dans une société qui les a autrefois marginalisées. Alors plus récemment, elle a occupé le poste de directrice au sein du programme Empowering Women in the Atlas, une initiative sociale qui vise à engager les femmes rurales dans la croissance économique et le développement durable dans les montagnes de l'Atlas au Maroc. Et donc par la suite, Maa s'est installée au Canada. Alors là, outre sa thèse, elle a enseigné à Concordia un cours sur le féminisme intersectionnel, Critical Race Feminisms, à l'Institut Simone de Beauvoir, ainsi qu'un cours de critique de médias au sein du département de communication. Actuellement, Maatazi travaille sur une production audiovisuelle appelée 103-13 pour sensibiliser le public quant à l'ampleur de la violence de genre au Maroc et la politisation de cette thématique et créer ainsi un appel féministe à l'action. Donc ce projet est en cours d'analyse auprès du Feminist Media Studies. Cher docteur Maatazi, je vous laisse la parole.
Super, merci Gaëlle pour cette introduction et pour les félicitations aussi, j'apprécie. Voilà, comme vous voyez, je vais présenter en anglais parce que toutes mes recherches et mes écrits sont en anglais et c'est aussi la langue dans laquelle j'écris ma dissertation et comme Gaëlle nous disait tout à l'heure, donc c'est un chapitre, 2 chapitres de ma dissertation qui portent sur le slam et sur le rap. Donc voilà, vous voyez ici le titre « Women's Creative Disobedience and the Continuing Gender Revolution in Post-Arab Spring Morocco » 2011 to 2019, even 20, slam poetry and raptivism. And as you can see, I'm starting with a quote from one of the pioneers of the rap movement in the United States, KRS-One, who says in his song, Hip Hop Lives, I quote, "Hip is to know, it's a form of intelligence. To be hip is to be updated and relevant. Hop is a form of movement. You can't just observe a hop, you gotta hop up and do it. Hip and hop is more than music. Hip is the knowledge, hop is the movement. Hip and hop is intelligent movement." So you might wonder what brought me to all this in the first place. So actually, as Gael was telling you in her introduction, I was born and raised in Morocco. And in the early 2000s, I started attending several music concerts that were organized by the alternative music scene in my native city in Casablanca. And I could not help but notice that these music concerts and the alternative music scene were very much um, social and politically aware, in that they tackled several social issues that were specific to Morocco in that context, such as widespread socioeconomic inequalities, which is a big issue in Morocco even today, regime abuse and corruption, illegal immigration, widespread drug abuse amongst the youth, etc. And in that sense, I felt that those music concerts contributed to shape my social and political consciousness at a very young age. And here, on the right hand of the picture, you can see me and a group of classmates attending a rap and hip hop concert in Casablanca back in 2007. On the left hand of the picture, I was 16 years old back then. But at the same time as I was attending those music concerts, as a young woman myself, I could not help but notice that even the countercultural scene, if I may call it like that, was very much male dominated, in the sense that there was little space for women artists, like women performing on stage, or even artists talking about gender issues in general. So I wonder, why did the alternative music scene fail to integrate women as part of its wider social justice agenda? A few years forward into my PhD journey, I came across a very interesting paradigm in the literature that describes Egyptian women's contemporary forms of resistance as creative disobedience, or else what we can call artivism or art activism. So since I had this sort of questioning from before about women and socially conscious art in Morocco, I decided to make it the topic of my dissertation at Concordia University in Montreal, and to investigate the existence, but also perhaps the patterns of women's creative disobedience in Morocco today in terms of the contents, the aesthetics, and the thematics that women artists tackle in their productions. In other words, since I focused on women's artistic expressions post-2011, I also asked the following question, perhaps indirectly. Did the Arab Spring constitute a sort of turning point for feminine artistic expressions in Morocco? So in my research, I draw on the following literature review. First, on Marwan Kraidi's notion of the creative insurgency of the Arab Spring, where he contends that the Arab Spring witnessed an explosion of creative talents to denounce regime abuse and corruption. Marwan highlights the highly inventive character of various forms of street art, as you can see here on the right hand, such as graffiti, hip-hop, digital memes, and mashups that were mobilized by journalists and activists alike in this context. Second, I draw on Marwan Badran's concept of women's creative disobedience in post-revolutionary Egypt today, where she posits that women, Egyptian women, are using creativity as a basic revolutionary to system oppression today. Hence her idea of the continuing gender and cultural revolution. So Badran posits that the end of the Arab political revolution only constitutes the beginning of the gender and cultural revolution, for women to advocate gender equality and social justice concomitantly. Dina Wahba also talks about women's parallel artistic revolution and the subaltern counterpublics, where Egyptian women artists are producing alternative narratives that challenge the dominant gender norms of their societies and promote social transformation. Last but not least, I also draw on Bell Hook's concept of talking back, which she defines as an oppositional stance and a counter-hegemonic discourse that responds to various structures of dominance simultaneously. So therefore, my research objectives are the following. First, to investigate women's artistic forms of resistance that express creative disobedience in contemporary Morocco today, meaning from 2011 onwards, by looking at two artistic genres, at least in this presentation, their main characteristics and the potential differences in women's art activism that reflect country specificities. Second, to examine how women's continued creative resistance can advocate an agenda that is inclusive of both women's rights and social justice in post-revolutionary Morocco today. So, whereas in my dissertation, I focused on the work on many artistic disciplines, such as theater, the visual arts, but also slam and raptivism, here I choose to focus on two specific chapters of my dissertation and on two case studies who are basically slam poet Nusayba Al-Hlu and rapper Snowflake Bitch, who are both 25 years old today. As for the artistic disciplines, I focus on slam poetry because poetry has long historical roots with political resistance in the Arab region, and slam poetry has become one of the favorite genres for political activists to articulate resistance across the region, especially for the youth today. Second, because young rappers of the Arab Spring presented themselves as the leaders of the cultural and political movements in various countries, and that these communities are continuing to use hip-hop as a cultural force to bring about political change today, I also focus on rap as a second discipline in this presentation. So my methodology in this presentation, in my research, was essentially qualitative, where I applied the following methods. So first, I did a textual and visual analysis of women's artworks. I selected 2 of Snowflake's rap freestyles and 8 of Nusayba's slam poems that were all chosen in collaboration with the women artists, in the sense that they represent their work, their artistic approach, and vision the best at the moment. I also did individual semi-structured interviews with each artist to find out more about the artist's approach, her objectives, and whether she identifies with Margot Badran's idea of women's continuing gender revolution today. So, all right, so my first case study is Nusayba's slam poetry. Nusayba, as discussed previously, is a 25-year-old slam poet who tackles various social issues in her slams. So first, she slams the corruption of the politicians in power, or what she refers to as the politiciens, or the polydocs in English. Nusayba writes, quotes, "Rest from the political slum and its smallness," end quotes. Nusayba, in this sense, apprehends her slam poetry in contradistinction with political discourses in Morocco in terms of their content, their rhetorics, and intentionality. She continues, quotes, "I'll read you far less sinister speeches. I'll wake up in a good hour, active in parliament. I swear love and honesty, aware from their talks that lie to us," end quotes. Here, Nusayba uses the tactic of reflectionism, where she basically reflects back and mirrors those in power to expose their flaws and wrongdoings and underscore the ideals of honesty, dedication, and benevolence that they should instead incarnate towards the Moroccan people. She also writes, quotes, "I show you my writing skills, stuffed with faults and a few scratches. Apparently, it became angry by nature. Your medieval system saturates it," end quote. Here, the term medieval system means that the system is basically outdated and unfit for today's world, probably in reference to the failure of the Moroccan Spring back in 2011 and the Mouvement du 20 février to bring about concrete social change and sustainable social change, especially. Nusayba also slams about what she perceives as a feminist cancer in the country. So first, she tackles the issue of feminist pinkwashing. She slams, quotes, "And women will only defend their rights when it comes to skirts, kisses, and blouses," end quote. Throughout her slam, I noticed, Nusayba advocates an intersectional feminism that is adapted to the local context in Morocco against the backdrop of the more mainstream white feminism, whereby certain priorities and issues and thematics are imported without any sense of cultural sensitivity in the country. In another slam, Nusayba underscores context-specific issues that Moroccan women face on a daily basis. From the social pressures to get married, quote, "Nice girls get married right away," end quote, to the pressures to conform to the ideals of femininity, "A woman who gets angry is not beautiful to look at," end quote, to limited geographic and intellectual mobility, quote, don't come home late, do not change your mind often, end quote. Hence, the word cancer could refer to the multiple social constraints and burden that women have to deal with on a daily basis in Morocco, and that have resulted in giving them a sort of cancer. Nusayba also advocates with the human dream, in contradistinction with the American capitalist dream. She slams, quote, time is money, capital, oil, end quote. She also denounces the prevalence of the military-industrial complex in today's societies and the growing individualism of our societies today, including Morocco. Quote, a society that consumes, but what jerks we have become, a cocoon and live alone, end quote. Nusayba's slums carry a strong humanist stance and underscore actually the intersectionality of all struggles. Finally, Nusayba also slams about the Moroccan winter. Her slam, called and titled Arab Winter, is a metaphor and a direct reference to the events of the Arab Spring of 2011, which turned out to be a winter in many countries with the rise today of political Islam to power, the refugee crisis, and the civil and tribal wars that are ravaging the region today. So the power of the Moroccan king to co-opt an entire revolution by adopting a new constitution that did not end up disrupting the status quo and bringing about effective social change in the country is best conveyed in Nusayba's metaphorical verse, quote, but since you have the power over the seasons, end quote, that is to make a spring a winter and vice versa, end quote, whoever is destined to fall, strangely one day rises, end quote. That is in reference to the Moroccan king and his political regime still holding steady and unreformed despite the local revolutionary movement that swept across Morocco in 2011-2012. Therefore, Nusayba's slam Arab Winter advocates the necessity for the revolution to be carried on exactly because it was hijacked by the regime and therefore never had the chance to bring about concrete social change. The two verses, quotes, I will lead the conformist rebel and we will lead this dream of realist democrats, end quotes, also speak to her and the Moroccan people's sense of surrender and resignation subsequent to their crushed dreams of revolution and reform from the time of the Arab Spring. Hence, the necessity, again, for the revolution of the minds and the spirits to continue, at least in those countercultural spheres where we see those ideas being very predominant. Which brings me now to my second case study, who is Snowflake Bitch, who is a 25 years old Moroccan rapper who chooses this sort of pseudonym for herself to underscore perhaps even the paradox that lays within her own person as a rapper. Snowflake referring to this sense of fragility and over sensitivity, being oversensitive, and the word basically the cursed bitch that refers to her sense of refusal to conform to traditional gender norms in Morocco. So on top of her freestyle, the Grunt freestyle, where she's shown rapping besides 4 men rappers, I'm going to show the picture later on, in the framework of a documentary on Moroccan rap by a French group called The Grunt, and her Listen You Male freestyle, which was filmed right from her kitchen, where she addresses the figure of the toxic male. So drawing on Judith Butler's concept of gender trouble, Snowflake effectively troubles the categories and attributes of gender in her freestyles. One of her most famous punchlines is, I quote, even if I'm a girl, I have my own balls, end quote. Here, Snowflake deconstructs the very logic behind the gender binary system, which is the over-reliance on the biological sex to come up with diametrically opposed classifications of gender roles and attributes. Snowflake does not need to have balls to technically have balls and courage to speak out against sexism. She also raps, you're not a man, you're just a male. Here, she creates another binary of man versus male to subvert and deconstruct the original binary of male versus female and men versus women, which is at the origin of all gender binaries and the resulting traditional gender roles in the country, but also in other contexts. So Snowflake also troubles the categories of gender by cursing repeatedly in her freestyles. And here you can see many instances where she uses, where she basically curses again, disrupt those norms of masculinity versus femininity and feminine appropriateness. Which is basically also done in a move of reappropriation of a male privilege. In fact, only men are allowed or tolerated to swear in Morocco, and as an open rejection of men's policing of women's language, because a woman basically that curse is a woman that is perceived as indecent and very vulgar. I'm sorry. Snowflake does not stop there. She also spits, saying, "I spit on you all." The act of spitting is also generally associated with men and also considered highly inappropriate and even gross for women. We also have a very recurrent trope in her freestyle, which is the trope of the sick or crazy woman. So Snowflake also denounces, in this sense, the dominant patriarchal narrative which depicts all daring and outspoken women against sexism as mad and crazy. In the freestyle, in both freestyles, she uses several verb cues which allude to the theme of the degenerates and the crazy. I quote, "Even if you all call me sick, my flow's so sick, everybody's getting sick. Only mom puts up with my craziness." Snowflake reappropriated the trope of the sick and angry woman to underscore her agency to infiltrate a highly dominated male terrain, which is the rap terrain, and spread feminist and social justice ideals. She raps, "I'm not an influencer, I'm an influenza." In her freestyles, Snowflake also denounces women's objectification and sexualization as she raps, "I'm carrying a mic, not a butt." Through the metaphor of the butt, she denounces the demeaning male gaze that objectifies and sexualizes her to discredit and shun her social political commentary whenever she's on stage. Another line follows the same logic. I quote, "I shoot words at you and all you do is comment on my lipstick," end quote. On her grand freestyle, where you can see her here on the right hand rapping besides 4 men rappers, we could see a lot of insulting comments from men with regards to her lipstick. As you can see, she's wearing a very dark and visible lipstick, asking her to go back to her kitchen, meaning to leave this main or male-dominated terrain and go back to where she belongs. The kitchen is the metaphor or the symbolism of the private sphere. Hence, Snowflake decided to produce her second freestyle, "Listen You Male," directly from her kitchen. Hence, Snowflake deconstructs another dominant patriarchal narrative that depicts all women as mere objects of male desires and fantasies. She raps, "Because I want respect, not cash." The following line underscores that her actual objective is not to be objectified, but to impact people's minds. Quote, "I don't want no mention or drive a Jaguar. I want to stay in your damn memory," meaning to raise awareness and bring about social change. The metaphor of staying in people's memories and leaving a mark behind oneself. Snowflake also denounces that her power to trouble the categories of gender resides precisely in her rap. Her agency as a woman and as a rapper stems not only from her presence in the male-dominated rap scene, but also in rap's inherent counterness. As rap was born in countercultural spheres and is still being reproduced today in such spheres. In this sense, the medium, rap, becomes the message itself. I quote, "I find my text sharp and cutting like a knife. I left people speechless and their saliva stuck in their mouth. I would be writing and he would be learning by heart. 2 words in the mic left people running aimlessly like an announcement at the station," end quote. So Snowflake also talks about wider social justice issues in her slams, denouncing widespread poverty and economic inequalities in the country. She raps, the circumstances here are tough," meaning in Morocco. In the following line, she elaborates on those circumstances or bad circumstances. She raps, my smile is fake like that of Jorf's. Jorf is, or Jorf al-Asfar, is a deep water commercial port in Morocco, very rich in natural resources, but mainly exploited by European companies today. Hence, Snowflake denounces neo-imperialism, which is basically at the origin of widespread socio-economic inequalities in Morocco, but also at the origin of widespread poverties, as Morocco's natural resources are increasingly being overexploited by European countries. Snowflake goes on, my tracks are like Ad-Duha and are made just in black. Ad-Duha is the leading real estate developer of social housing, or just the real estate, the main real estate actor in Morocco. By talking about black, or in reference to the black economy, Snowflake aims to denounce the overall corruption of the real estate industry in Morocco. In the following line, I live on Indomie, misery in my blood, Snowflake tells us that she is one of the many people who live below the poverty line in Morocco. In fact, Snowflake does not come from a privileged background. She's self-taught and self-educated, and she's fluent in English, French, and Moroccan Arabic. In another line, Snowflake tells her audience that all she can afford to produce her rap songs are a pen and black coffee, reminding us again, once more, of de Certeau's concept of making do, meaning the art of the weak that marginalized people mobilized to contest hegemonic power. Snowflake also told me that she was very much inspired by the events of the Moroccan Spring and the Mouvement du 20 février, which shaped her early political consciousness since she was only 14 years old at that time. And that most of her freestyles emerged out of that political consciousness. Finally, Snowflake also raps against the status quo in Morocco. Quote, leave me alone, you can't put up with my venom. Flow so sick, everybody's getting sick. Even if you all call me sick, I'm a healer. I'm not an influencer, as we quoted before, I'm an influenza. Here, through the alternation between the trope of the sickness and that of the cure, Snowflake underscores her role as a social healer in affecting a change in people's mentalities. She is at the same time the disease, meaning the crazy outspoken woman, and the cure, which resides in her agency and power to deconstruct traditional gender roles and denounce widespread social, political, and economic corruption. So I'm going to move to a few concluding words after presenting my two case studies. So carrying on the spirit of the 2000 Feminist Spring for Equality and Democracy, which was the sub-branch of the 20th February movement of the Moroccan Spring, Moroccan women artists have presented in their artworks an intersectional analysis which underscores the interlocking effects of several systems of oppression at once. Authoritarianism, patriarchy, and neo-imperialism in furthering women's systemic oppression in present-day Morocco today. So women's artistic productions draw on the concept of artgression, meaning art and transgression through the use of transgressive visuals, aesthetics, lyrics, words, and performances to talk back to various regimes and structures of dominance at once. In this sense, women's artworks have contributed and performances have contributed to the revival of the reformist ideology of the Mouvement du 20 février back in 2011 by continuing to social, political, and economic and ideological issues from a decade ago. They have also carried on the reformist spirit, of the Arab Spring, of the Moroccan Spring particularly. Nusayba captures this stance very well. As she says in one of her slams, I'm not anti-system, I'm much other dirts, because before being anti-system, you must first be anti your society, end quote. Future research could therefore explore the resonances between women's discourses and creative productions that circulate across and beyond national frontiers, hence the transnational aspects of women's activism in the North African region and perhaps even the overall Arab region that could be explored in the framework of future research. So I would like to end on a quote by Lebanese curator Rasha Salti, quoted in Miriam Cook on the transnational feminist impetus of the continuing gender and cultural revolution in the North African region today. Quotes, Through the fabrication of artists, filmmakers, novelists, poets, musicians, and dancers, our civility and solidarity are recorded in poems, novels, paintings, photographs, and films. In 2013, an ever-growing number of Arab artists has not only rescued me from surrendering to despair, but given me the strength to imagine that the future is mine, ours, end quote. Thank you very much for your time and for listening to my presentation.
Merci beaucoup, Maha, pour cette présentation. Nous avons prévu de poser des questions juste avant la pause, donc après les 3 premières interventions. Donc, je vais demander au public de réserver ces questions pour tout à l'heure. Je vous précise toutefois que Maha ne va pas pouvoir rester avec nous pour la deuxième partie du panel. Donc, les questions à destination de Maha Tazi seront juste après ces 3 présentations. Alors, on va revenir au PowerPoint. Puisque nous allons maintenant entendre Felicia Nietzsche, qui est allemande et qui est étudiante en master à l'université de Bayreuth en Allemagne. Felicia a obtenu une licence en histoire de l'art, musicologie et études des médias à l'université de Marburg. Elle termine actuellement son master en études africaines avec une spécialisation en art et conservation et en études francophones à l'université de Bayreuth, donc, où elle travaille en particulier sur la collection d'art visuel moderne et contemporain d'Afrique, d'Asie, mais aussi de la région Pacifique. Alors, dans le cadre de son travail et de ses études à l'université de Bayreuth, elle a été l'assistante du commissaire pour l'exposition de l'artiste anglo-nigériane Ndidi Dike, et elle fut aussi commissaire associée de l'exposition Exodus Stations No. 2, toujours à Bayreuth. Entre 2015 et 2018, elle a participé activement à l'organisation d'une exposition qui s'intitulait Future Africa Visions in Time à Ouagadougou, au Musée national du Burkina Faso, exposition qui s'est ouverte en 2018. Alors, cette exposition est le fruit de collaboration entre des artistes contemporains internationaux et des chercheurs venus de différentes disciplines. Enfin, en 2020, Felicia a été la commissaire associée de l'exposition de l'artiste ougandaise Stacey Gilianabe, intitulée Indiegogo, à Liwa, alors excusez-moi pour la prononciation, Liwalewa House de Bayreuth. Alors, ces recherches actuelles et ces centres d'intérêt portent sur l'art moderne congolais, la théorie féministe de l'art et la théorie postcoloniale féministe. Alors, Felicia Nietzsche va nous présenter et nous faire découvrir ou redécouvrir l'artiste Antoinette Loubaki. Donc, on va aller sur la première image qui est la carte du Congo, puisqu'Antoinette Loubaki était congolaise à l'époque où le pays s'appelait le Congo belge, qui est devenu Zaïre et que l'on connaît aujourd'hui sous le nom de République démocratique du Congo. Ceux qui, parmi vous, ont vu l'exposition d'André Magnien intitulée Beauté Congo, Congo Kitoko de 1926-2015 à la Fondation Cartier, donc à Paris en 2015, ont pu découvrir cet artiste peintre et aquarelliste, surtout des années 30. Alors l'image suivante où on voit une aquarelle d'Antoinette Loubaki. André Magnien, dans le catalogue de son exposition, a relaté sa découverte de cet artiste. Voici quelques éléments du récit. Évidemment, Felicia va longuement développer. Donc, dans les années 1920, un fonctionnaire belge du nom de Georges Thierry, qui était connaisseur des arts de l'avant-garde parisienne et sensible aux arts africains, fit la découverte de murs peints au Congo et s'interrogea sur leur conservation. Il identifia les artistes, en fait 3, Alfred et Antoinette Loubaki dans le Katanga à Bukama et Djila Tendo dans le Kasaï. C'est lui, donc Georges Thierry, qui leur demanda de reprendre ces œuvres sur un support mobile en leur fournissant du papier et de l'aquarelle et en les invitant à reprendre ce travail de peinture, de fresque sur du papier. Thierry en envoya un certain nombre à son supérieur hiérarchique, Gaston Denis Perrier, qui décida d'exposer 163 aquarelles d'Alfred Loubaki au Palais des Beaux-Arts de Bruxelles en 1929. Alfred Loubaki et son épouse Antoinette, ainsi que Gila Tendo, exposèrent par la suite dans de nombreuses manifestations en Europe, en Belgique, en Suisse, à Genève en 1930, puis en France et en Italie. En 1935, suite à une mésentente entre les deux Belges, donc Thierry et Perrier, plus personne ne s'occupa de travailler auprès des artistes congolais, et donc plus aucune production n'est connue, à l'exception, en 1939, d'une douzaine d'œuvres de Loubaki commandées par le directeur du musée d'ethnographie de Genève, Eugène Pitard, œuvres qui sont toujours conservées au MEG, au musée d'ethnographie de Genève. Alors j'en ai peut-être déjà trop dit, alors je vais laisser la parole à Félicia qui va nous permettre de pouvoir enfin réinscrire Antoinette Loubaki dans l'histoire de l'art congolais. Chère Félicia, je vous laisse la parole.
Okay, thank you for the kind introduction. I'm glad to have the opportunity today to speak on Antoinette Loubaki. As you might have noticed, the spelling of her name differs in my presentation from the spelling of her name in the symposium program. This is due to the different signatures found on Antoinette's watercolors. One part is signed Antoinette and others are signed Antoinette Nfumbi. In the publication La Vivante des Noirs du Congo Belge from Gaston Denis Perrier in 1936, where Antoinette is mentioned for the first time, she is referred to as Antoinette Loubaki. This spelling became common in other publications that followed. I chose to employ the name Antoinette Loubaki as this signature can most likely be linked with Antoinette Loubaki, but I will come to this in more detail later. First, I want to comment on why I am interested in Antoinette Loubaki and from which position I am speaking about her. As you heard, I'm studying and working at Iwa Leberhaus, University of Bayreuth, an institution that hosts a collection of modern and contemporary visual art, mainly from Africa. Within this collection, there's one watercolor of Antoinette Loubaki that you can see behind me, and 4 of her husband Albert Loubaki, as well as 7 watercolors of their contemporary Gila Tendo, and 1 drawing of the Belgian colonial officer Georges Thierry, who claimed to have discovered the artists. So my research started as a research from the collection Iwa Leberhaus as to understand how these works came into the collection, their relation and relevance within the collection and within African modern art. I must precise here that I did not do research in the Congo, as this was not possible with the current situation. Nevertheless, I went to Brussels to do research at the Royal Library of Belgium, where 5 of Antoinette's watercolors are to be found. From the beginning, it was clear to me that I will focus on Antoinette Loubaki from a feminist perspective, as the very few female artists in the Iwa Leberhaus collection and in African modern art have not gotten adequate attention. As Nanette Salomon rightly states, and I quote, "The recovery of women artists is bringing normal selection under direct scrutiny and thereby denaturalizing and politicizing it." End of quote. The publications on the so-called precursors of modern Congolese art prove that there is very little written on Antoinette Loubaki, and that what is written about her is shaped by a colonial white male discourse. In more recent exhibitions like Beauté Congo in 2015, her watercolors were finally taken into account. Still, there is no major publication on Antoinette Loubaki as an artist in her own right. The structure of my presentation today is the following. I will start with showing you the only photograph that exists from Antoinette and Albert Loubaki, at least that I know of. Starting from there, I will share with you the very little information on her person. Then I want to talk about 3 works of Antoinette Loubaki and approach each of them in a different way. The first approach I want to use by the example of one artwork is that of the object biography. By this approach, I want to raise the following questions. What was the context of creation for these watercolors? How did they come to Europe? Who owned them and who wrote about them? And where was the artwork exhibited? With the second artwork, I want to look at the medium, the signature, and the visual language. Finally, with the third artwork, I want to talk about the reception of Antoinette Loubaki's artistic productions and how her works were framed by the art world and academics. Next slide, please. This photograph was taken in the late 1920s in Katanga, the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The photographer is unknown. We see Antoinette Loubaki and Albert Loubaki standing in the middle, land on a high table. On the left and the right side from the couple are sitting each one gentleman. The photograph was first published in 1982 in a book by Georges Thierry called À la recherche de la peinture nègre. It is very probable that the photograph was taken by a professional photographer, considering the arrangement, exposure, and the requirements for taking and developing a photo at that time. Bambi Kuipens writes on photographs who depict Congolese men and women dressed in European style at the end of the 19th century and during the 1930s that most of these photographs were taken by Congolese rather than European photographers who preferred to forget the Congo's contemporaneity. In the literature, I found Antoinette's name for the first time in an article by Gaston Denis Perrier called L'art vivant de Nord du Congo belge, published in 1936. In this article, Gaston Denis Perrier cites from a document written by Thierry saying, and I quote, "Loubaki's workshop is located behind a termite mound. 2 birds are painted on his yellow clay house. Antoinette, whose name is pronounced Antoinette by the blacks, also imitates her husband's colorful drawings. Since 1926, the household has been painting," end of quote. By stating that Antoinette is imitating the drawings of her husband, he is not attributing her any artistic innovativeness. Antoinette Loubaki was born in Cabinda into the family of the chief of the village named Lumpungu. Her exact date of birth or death are not known, but probably Antoinette was born around 1895. And as I already said, she was married to Albert Loubaki, who was also a painter. Next slide, please. This painting is from the collection of Ivalewa House. The title is unknown. It is a landscape format measuring 52 by 66 centimeters and painted with watercolors on paper. When taking a close look, one can also see a preliminary drawing in pencil. Framed by a dark green border, Antoinette Loubaki depicted a scene containing 3 men and a large bird. The figures move and observe the bird. Their attire is Western, elaborately detailed with pockets and buttons. The man on the right, walking away from the scene, is wearing a hat and smoking a pipe. The painting was created between 1926 and 1936. At this time, the Democratic Republic of the Congo was a colony of the Belgian state and called the Belgian Congo. Georges Thierry, who collected the artworks of Antoinette and Albert Loubaki, was an administration officer in the Belgian Congo. In his publication, À la recherche de la peinture nègre, he describes himself as an explorer and poet. His literary pseudonym was Georges Dulonge. He wrote several articles in reviews and was also an amateur artist himself. In 1926, he first traveled to the Belgian Congo. While being there, he admired the mural paintings he saw. I quote, "And these African murals, by the freshness of their colors and the boldness of their arabesques, while reminding me of the masterpieces of what was then called vivid art, immersed me in admiration." End of quote. He then commissioned the painters to transfer the motifs on the murals onto paper using watercolor paints. He provided Albert Lubaki with watercolors and paper and paid him either with money or with European consumer goods. Georges Thierry sent the works to Gaston Denis Perrier, who was a senior official at the Ministry of Economic Affairs in Brussels, responsible for drawing up customs regulations for the African colony. Under his orders, various agents had to levy taxes, and one of them was Georges Thierry. Gaston Denis Perrier was an extremely active man of letters, and he wrote articles about the artists and the works. Due to his efforts, the artworks were exhibited several times. Georges Thierry acted like a patron to the artists whose work he collected, but there is no documentation that he established direct contact with Antoinette Lubaki. I must presume that Antoinette was introduced to painting with watercolors by her husband and that the latter transmitted her works to Georges Thierry. In the beginning of 1932, it already came to disagreements between Georges Thierry and Gaston Denis Perrier. The misunderstanding between the two promoters was unfortunately fatal to the artists. In 1936, the last compositions were sent by Albert Lubaki. He complained to the district commissioner that he can no longer work because of lack of material. So how did Antoinette's watercolor come from Gaston Denis Perrier in Belgium to the collection of Iwa House? Gaston Denis Perrier died in 1962. When in 1971 his widow died, the descendants asked the art dealer Ivan Dierix to examine the collection of important African sculptures. During this process, Ivan Dierix discovered boxes with correspondences between Gaston Denis Perrier and Georges Thierry, and over 500 paintings by the artists Chilatendo, Albert, and Antoinette Lubaki, Masalai, and Ngoma. Ivan Dierix bought a big part of the estate of Gaston Denis Perrier and his wife. In 1982, Oli Bayer, the founder and director of Iwa House, himself an art lover and collector, wanted to buy the whole collection from Ivan Dierix. In a letter to Klaus-Dieter Wolf, president of the University of Bayreuth at that time, Oli Bayer wrote, "One could buy a closed collection here, which would be of particular value to the University of Bayreuth, above all because it is so excellently documented. These are without doubt the best documents on modern African art I have ever seen." End of quote. But Oli Bayer did not get funding to buy the whole collection, so he only bought a few works in the years 1983, 84, and 85, and finally Antoinette's work in 1988. The watercolor you see on your screen was exhibited in the exhibition Lieblingsstücke, Favorite Pieces, at Iwa House in 2017 and 18, and in the exhibition Congo Stars at the Kunsthaus Graz in Austria and at the Kunsthalle Tübingen in Germany in 2018 and 19. The works of Antoinette and Albert Lubaki are today scattered throughout Europe. They are at the Royal Museum for Central Africa in Tervuren, at the Royal Library of Belgium in Brussels, at Iwa House, University of Bayreuth, at the Musée d'Ethnographie de Genève in Geneva, and in private collections. By means of this watercolor, I want to talk about the medium, the signature, and Antoinette's visual language. This watercolor belongs to the Royal Library of Belgium in Brussels. The title is unknown. It is a landscape format measuring 55 by 73 centimeters. Like the first watercolor, there is a preliminary drawing in pencil. Framed by a dark purple border, Antoinette Lubaki depicted two women sitting opposite each other in the shade of a tree. Three birds are part of the scene as well as a cat or dog climbing the tree. The two women wear patterned dresses and seem to be in a conversation. While in the 1920s and 30s, Europeans regarded three-dimensional works as synonymous with African art, painting of African provenance received very little attention. It was a novelty to paint with watercolors on paper. Therefore, the watercolors of Antoinette Lubaki and her contemporaries are often classified as the beginning of African modern art. Next slide, please. Antoinette Lubaki's watercolors stand in the tradition of mural painting. In the Belgian Congo, murals were only executed from 1900 onwards. This was due to the fact that it was previously unusual to plaster the woven mats of the house walls. In many African societies, mural painting, as well as the execution of body painting, was and still is a strong female tradition. Both forms of painting and their execution were an important part of initiation rites and were performed in so-called seclusion huts. The woman's repertoire of forms consisted, among other things, of ornaments which in their high degree of abstraction referred to evolved very complex orders and realities. Under the changed social conditions of the colonial period, these ornamental traditions of women lost their significance. Under the influence of the colonial regime, the geometric patterns and abstract representations were displaced by a figurative style of painting that depicted visually perceptible reality. From the end of the 19th century, painting became a practically exclusive male domain in the Congo. It is probable that Antoinette's practice of watercolor painting was induced by her husband and her environment, as for them the practice of body and mural painting was a female tradition. A woman executing this form of art was in this context not unusual. In contrast, female artistic activities were routinely regarded as inferior by colonial officials in Central Africa. Now I want to talk about the signature. As I said in the beginning, there are different signatures to be found on Antoinette's watercolors. The painting on the left, which I took from the Aware website, is signed Antoinette Nfumbi. The other paintings in the Royal Library of Belgium and the one in the collection of Iwalewa House are signed Antoinette. In the right on the bottom, you can see a detail from one watercolor from the collection of the Royal Library. I assume that the signature Antoinette Nfumbi was added or written by someone else, and that the signature Antoinette was written by her husband, Albert Lubaki, as the handwriting resembles very much his signature, especially the letter A and the I. On the left, you can see a detail from a painting by Albert Lubaki, and on the right up in the corner, you can see Antoinette's signature, and on the right, on the bottom, this is also a detail from the same painting of Albert Lubaki. Joseph Aurélien Cornet, who was an art historian and the director of the Institute of National Museums of Congo Zaire, is sure about that. I quote, "Undoubtedly, the said Antoinette was illiterate, as the script of the signature suggests that the husband himself wrote his wife's name," end of quote. Of course, this is just an assumption from my side and I cannot prove it until now. There's more research needed, especially on the question of how and where the name and the signature Antoinette Nfumbi appeared. Besides the signature, on some paintings of Antoinette and Albert Lubaki, one can find another writing indicating probably the place of creation, what you can see in the right on the bottom. It is a bit difficult to decipher, but I read or at Kalenga, which is a town in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The handwriting also looks alike on Antoinette's as well as on Albert Loubaki's paintings. I now want to talk a little bit about Antoinette Loubaki's style or her visual language. As you might have noticed, her paintings are framed by a painted border and contain a preparatory drawing in pencil. The border could date back to mural painting. On this slide, you can see a painting from Antoinette on the left, and on the right, a mural painting from the village Equibondo. Each subject in the mural painting is framed by a geometrical pattern. The subjects of Antoinette Loubaki's paintings are also always framed, although by a simple plain border. Both paintings are figurative and depict people, animals, and vegetation. People, animals, and nature are in close relation in Antoinette Loubaki's paintings and seem to have the same significance. Each painting has their own palette of colors that seem to have been chosen carefully. On the digital reproductions, the colors seem delicate, but on the originals, the colors are intense. The use of space in the paintings is balanced and the motifs are arranged symmetrically. Colonial modernity and the everyday life are subject to Antoinette's paintings. By means of this watercolor, I want to talk about the reception of Antoinette Loubaki's artistic production and how her works were framed during the colonial time and after by the art world and academics. This watercolor belongs to the Royal Library of Belgium in Brussels. The title is unknown. It is a landscape format measuring 55 by 73 centimeters. The framing border is painted in blue and pink, and there's a preparatory drawing in pencil. The scene contains a tree in the middle, and to the left and right, each one person harvesting a fruit from the tree. Regarding the reception of the watercolors in Europe, one can roughly distinguish two periods, one before the Second World War and one after. The Second World War largely interrupted communication with the colonies. The reception of the watercolors in the first period was dominated by what Georges Thierry and Gaston Denis Perrier published and shared with the public. I already cited Georges Thierry through Gaston Denis Perrier, who said that Antoinette was imitating the drawings of her husband. Beyond that, Thierry did not publish anything in the 1920s or 30s. It was only in 1982 when he published his book À la recherche de la peinture nègre, les peintres naïfs congolais Loubaki et Gilatendo. In this publication, he did not mention Antoinette Loubaki. Furthermore, it reads like a romanticizing account of his adventures in the Belgian Congo. His writing on Albert Loubaki and Gilatendo is shaped by a paternalistic colonial ideology. Gaston Denis Perrier was a fervent promoter of Albert Loubaki and Gilatendo in Europe. From 1929 on, he organized exhibitions and wrote articles in journals and reviews. In 1929, Albert Loubaki's paintings were shown for the first time at the Palais des Beaux-Arts in Brussels as part of a large exhibition of French and Belgian primitive and popular art. This was followed by other exhibitions in Geneva, in Paris, and in Rome. Antoinette Loubaki's works were probably not part of the exhibitions, at least her name does not appear in any documents related to them. The works of the so-called precursors of modern Congolese art were read in the 1930s as primitive or naive. Although Gaston Denis Perrier called it popular art or l'art vivant des Noirs, vivid art, as he entitled one of his articles in 1936, he had an idyllic vision of Central Africa, never having set foot on the African continent until then. He writes on Albert Loubaki's artistic productions, and I quote, "He paints as the bird sings, as the elder tells the legends of the clan under the moon. His watercolors are unpretentious, exquisitely spontaneous, and full of the joy of life. This is where they differ from the fake primitives and are vibrant with a humor that changes us from sad naivety, end of quote. In 1959, Gaston Denis Perrier handed over one part of his collection of Loubaki's and Chilatendo's works to the Royal Library of Belgium. But only in 1979, after his widow had died, some of the paintings were again shown in the exhibition Art from Africa at the first Festival of World Cultures in Berlin. Also in this exhibition, there is no trace that Antoinette Loubaki's works were shown. Badi Banga Mwine writes in the catalogue article, and I quote, "The pictures were signed Loubaki, Antoinette, or A. Loubaki." After that, no more word on Antoinette Loubaki. In 1991, the watercolors of Albert Loubaki and Chilatendo were part of the exhibition Africa Explores 20th Century African Art at the Center for African Art in New York. Bogumil Jevsiewicki writes in his catalogue article under the headline "The Origins and Social Context of Zairean Urban Painting" only on Albert Loubaki and Chilatendo. Jevsiewicki says their paintings, and I quote, should similarly be analyzed as an intellectual and artistic reading of the colonial West. These painters tried to understand what colonial modernity meant, seeking to put the colonialists, their objects, and their people into a meaningful framework, end of quote. In this sense, according to Bogumil Jevsiewicki, they are precursors of contemporary so-called popular painting, which is represented beyond the borders of today's Democratic Republic of Congo, for example, by Chéri Samba. In 2015, the exhibition Beauté Congo presented at the Fondation Cartier pour l'Art Contemporain with the aim to honor the creative spirit of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, showed 4 works of Antoinette Loubaki under the name Antoinette Loubaki. The painting you see on the screen was one of them. In 2016, the Royal Museum for Central Africa, in collaboration with the Center for Fine Arts Brussels, showed an exhibition on Congolese popular painting entitled Congo Artworks. The exhibition included watercolors by Albert Loubaki and Chilatendo. Although there is no record that Antoinette's paintings were shown, Bambi Kuipens writes in her catalogue article, and I quote, "Loubaki's wife, Antoinette, was a gifted painter in her own right, but few of her works survived," end of quote. Antoinette's watercolor in the collection of Iwalewa House was part of the exhibition Lieblingsstücke, Favorite Pieces, in 2017 and 18. This exhibition assembled objects and artworks from the collection of Iwalewa House that were part of the series Object of the Month. The latter artwork was also shown in the exhibition Congo Stars in 2018 and 19. Now I'm coming to the conclusion. So coming back to the title of my presentation, Reinscribing Antoinette Loubaki into Congolese Art History, I chose that title because, as I said in the beginning, Antoinette's artistic productions were insufficiently or not at all discussed in the publications on Congolese art history. This is due to various reasons, some of which I have already mentioned. First of all, Antoinette did not produce as much works as her husband and her contemporaries. I did not succeed in making a catalogue of works, as some of her watercolors belonged to private collectors who didn't respond to me. But I assume that there are maybe 30 to 50 works in comparison to hundreds of her husband, Albert Loubaki. Secondly, her being a woman, she was regarded as inferior by the colonial regime. What was first written about her by Georges Thierry and Gaston Denis Perrier shaped the narratives that came after. Furthermore, not much has survived about Antoinette Loubaki. As in our Western society, knowledge production is based on written sources and not on oral tradition, as in many African society, she is not written into Congolese art history. My presentation showed that more research is needed, especially in the Congo, where there still might be people who knew her and who could share more about her and her work. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Félicia. Une première question de la part de Karen Milbourne qui vous demande si vous pourriez nous en dire plus sur les cadres ou les bordures qu'Antoinette a peint, en fait, qu'on voit sur chacune des aquarelles. Karen est intriguée par leur irrégularité intentionnelle. Certains se lisent presque comme un livre plié ou ouvert. Donc voici la première question et il y a encore 2 autres questions de la part du public à votre attention.
Yes, thanks for the questions. So the painted frame or border, it's true that it is often irregular, and for me it seems to be like putting the people on a kind of stage, but also often the depicted people or animals interact with the frame. So as you can see, for example, behind me, there's one person standing on this frame or on this border, yeah. And so in a lot of works, the frame with the depicted scene interacts, yeah. And as I said, this might come from the tradition of mural painting, as those were also often framed, yeah, and there was always a connection between the frame and the depicted scene, so to say.
Merci beaucoup, Félicia. Alors, une autre question pour vous de Lanissa Kitchener, donc, qui nous dit l'un des pères fondateurs de l'art nouveau belge, Henri van den Velde, a été fortement influencé par le tatouage des femmes congolaises, notamment, par exemple, le mangbélé ou le mousseau. Est-ce que cet art corporel apparaît comme une inspiration essentielle dans l'art, la mode, l'architecture et la peinture belge? Mais dans quelle mesure peut-on créditer les femmes congolaises jusqu'à Loubaki d'être une source d'inspiration pour le modernisme international tel que nous le connaissons aujourd'hui?
Yeah, this question is a bit difficult to answer, but as I said in my presentations in the 30s, like ethnologists foregrounded three-dimensional works of art, yeah, and masks, for example, as we saw in your presentation, Gael. So they were inspired by these objects, and Antoinette's paintings were not known at this time in Europe. So I don't think that, or I cannot say at this moment that they have influenced European modernists. But yeah, I think we have to do more research and make this women visible, and also open up our collections to see if there are connections. Yeah, I hope this answers the question.
Oui, ce sont des pistes. Merci beaucoup. Nous avons donc 2 questions de Nadine Oupata, qui vous félicite tout d'abord pour votre présentation, Félicia, et qui voudrait savoir tout d'abord si nous avons des informations, des témoignages sur la relation, collaboration professionnelle qui existait entre Antoinette et Albert. Et sa deuxième question, savons-nous si Antoinette a dans son sillage, dans son entourage, suscité des vocations auprès d'autres femmes, donc en termes d'aquarellistes, bien entendu.
Yeah, thank you, Nadine. Yeah, I think also, as I said, I cannot answer to this question as yeah, there is not much documents on this subject, like what was the relationship between Antoinette and Albert we just don't have any written documentation on this. So yeah, one would have to travel to the Congo and see if there are maybe still family members alive who could tell us more about this. And yeah, I would love to research that in the future. And yeah, the second, it's the same for the second question as well.